Welcome to this presentation on one of the founding principles of restorative education. Restorative education is a movement founded on the belief that education is the key to restoring lives as whole humans. That is, learning problem solving that heals the damage of living both physically and mentally. Today, I am going to be talking about this equation that underpins restorative education. Neuroplasticity plus metacognition equals self-authorship. Restorative education is an approach to education that supports growth and development. And we know that this is possible because the research on neuroplasticity and metacognition is so clear. So let's start with the latest research on neuroplasticity, which basically shows the more that you engage in a specific activity, the more nerve growth you have. So much so that large-scale morphological changes can be observed. So not only do you get better at that activity, but your brain physically changes in relationship to that development. Even activities that don't seem like doing anything, things like, paying attention and focusing, have actually been shown to correlate with growth in specific parts of the brain. For example, the anterior cingulate cortex grows in size the more that it is engaged in tasks of cognitive rivalry that force you to pay attention, like what's seen in like a Stroop task. This suggests that all skills of the mind, from focusing attention to movements of the body, are developable and produce both physical changes in the brain and noticeable improvements in the skills that those brain regions correlate to. This suggests that skills of the mind, from focusing our attention to the movement of our bodies, are developable and produce both physical changes in the brain and noticeable improvements in skills that those specific brain regions correlate to. It also suggests that when we are not developing skills, that we might atrophy from not using. So neuroplasticity kind of helps explain why we see so many individual differences between people. The old idea was that people were born with fixed genetic differences, but that is only the first shuffling of the deck. What you become, however, turns out to be largely impacted by your environment, which can reshuffle that deck not only through lasting epigenetic changes, but also through slow and steady neuroplastic interactions. And what we're finding is that this neuroplastic change can be driven by both a person's internal and external environments. Essentially, your biology sets sort of these initial conditions, and then it responds to your experience, building you in response to your lived experience. However, when the brain's ability for neuroplasticity is combined with its ability for metacognition, well, something truly incredible happens. Metacognition, in case you don't know, is the brain's ability to reflect on its own processing, to monitor and regulate its own behavior. It is classically described as thinking about thinking. But what is underappreciated is the relationship this ability has with our behavior and how it relates to our capacity to change and organize our behavior and our very environments. This relationship is critical because neuroplasticity expresses itself as a result of engaging in specific behaviors within specific environments. Through metacognition, we can identify which behaviors we want to develop and then deliberately practice them. We can also design and organize our environments to make the performance of these behaviors easier and more frequent, or maybe less common if we're trying to, reduce or change a behavior. This is where self-authorship emerges. When you combine the brain's ability to change itself through experience with the ability to consciously direct that experience, you gain agency over your own development. You become the author of who you are becoming. This is the heart of restorative education, giving people the tools they need to intentionally reshape themselves and live their lives through the strategic application of neuroplasticity guided by that metacognitive awareness. So, in conclusion, this simple equation, neuroplasticity plus metacognition equals self-authorship, demonstrates a simple and elegant reality. That you can become the author of your own story, not because life is easy or the brain is infinitely malleable, but because the science is clear. The brain changes in response to experience, and metacognition gives us the power to shape that experience with intention. Restorative education is built on this truth when we teach people not just what to think, but how to use that thinking about thinking. We hand them something profound, the ability to deliberately participate in their own development. This is what it means to live as a whole human. Not to be defined by your history, your diagnosis, your circumstances, but to understand that with the right tools and the right supports, you can engage in the ongoing work of becoming. That work is never finished, and that is exactly the point. The equation is simple, but the implications are life-changing. Thank you for watching.